Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that a new manufacturing process for a critical medical device component has been implemented, and while initial production runs appear successful, there are concerns raised by a junior quality control technician regarding subtle variations in material consistency that were not explicitly addressed in the initial risk assessment. The team leader suggests proceeding with full-scale production, citing the absence of immediate product failures and the pressure to meet market demand. Which of the following represents the most appropriate approach to managing this situation? Option A. Defer a formal risk assessment until a significant number of devices have been produced and potential problems have become more apparent, allowing for a more data-driven evaluation. Option B. Focus the risk assessment solely on the potential for production delays and cost overruns, as these are the most immediate concerns for meeting market demand. Option C. Proceed with full-scale production as planned, relying on the team leader's experience and the absence of immediate product failures, and address any issues that may arise retrospectively. Option D. Conduct a thorough, documented risk assessment of the new manufacturing process, specifically evaluating the potential impact of the observed material variations on device performance and patient safety, and implement appropriate control measures before proceeding with full-scale production. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough, documented risk assessment of the new manufacturing process, specifically evaluating the potential impact of the observed material variations on device performance and patient safety, and implement appropriate control measures before proceeding with full-scale production. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment principles within the specific context of Fresenius's operations, which likely involve medical devices and patient care. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could impact patient safety, regulatory compliance, and business continuity, necessitating a systematic and evidence-based approach rather than a reactive or superficial one. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor inconveniences and significant threats. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential hazards, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and evaluates existing controls. This aligns with best professional practices and regulatory expectations for organizations like Fresenius, which are subject to stringent quality management system requirements, e.g., ISO 13485, FDA regulations. A thorough risk assessment ensures that resources are allocated effectively to mitigate the most critical risks, thereby protecting patients, maintaining product quality, and ensuring compliance with applicable laws and guidelines. This proactive stance is ethically imperative in the healthcare sector. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on immediate operational disruptions without considering the downstream impact on patient safety or regulatory standing. This fails to meet the ethical obligation to prioritize patient well-being and the legal requirement to maintain compliance with healthcare regulations. It represents a failure to conduct a holistic risk assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss potential risks based on anecdotal evidence or personal experience rather than objective data and systematic analysis. This is professionally unacceptable as it lacks the rigor required for effective risk management and can lead to overlooking critical vulnerabilities. It violates the principle of evidence-based decision-making fundamental to quality management and regulatory adherence. A third incorrect approach would be to prioritize risks based on their perceived financial impact alone, neglecting risks that, while potentially less costly in the short term, could have severe consequences for patient safety or regulatory compliance. This demonstrates a significant ethical lapse and a failure to understand the broader responsibilities of operating within the healthcare industry, where patient welfare is paramount. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This involves establishing context, identifying risks through brainstorming, expert opinion, and historical data, analyzing risks by assessing likelihood and impact, evaluating risks by comparing them against risk criteria, and treating risks through mitigation, acceptance, transfer, or avoidance. Regular monitoring and review are essential to ensure the ongoing effectiveness of the risk management process. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both ethical obligations and regulatory requirements. Question 2. Upon reviewing the operational procedures at Fresenius Dialysis Center, a risk assessment team is tasked with identifying potential hazards. Which of the following approaches would best ensure a comprehensive and effective risk assessment process? Option A. Conducting a series of interviews with long-tenured staff to gather insights on past incidents and perceived risks. Option B. Focusing exclusively on risks that have historically resulted in significant financial losses for the organization. Option C. Implementing a structured process that involves defining the scope, identifying hazards through multiple methods, e.g., process mapping, incident data review, expert consultation, analyzing likelihood and impact, and evaluating existing controls. Option D. Developing a checklist of common dialysis-related risks and marking off those that appear relevant without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Conducting a series of interviews with long-tenured staff to gather insights on past incidents and perceived risks. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient risk identification with the imperative to conduct a thorough and objective assessment. The pressure to quickly identify potential risks, especially in a dynamic healthcare environment like Fresenius, can lead to superficial analysis or the overlooking of critical, albeit less obvious, threats. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the risk assessment process is both comprehensive and actionable, rather than merely a perfunctory exercise. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it emphasizes a systematic and evidence-based methodology for risk assessment. This involves clearly defining the scope, identifying potential hazards, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and then evaluating the existing controls. This structured process ensures that all relevant aspects of risk are considered, leading to more accurate and effective mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and operational excellence expected within a regulated healthcare setting, where patient safety and regulatory compliance are paramount. An incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured framework fails to provide a robust and defensible risk assessment. This can lead to regulatory or ethical failures by potentially overlooking emerging risks or underestimating the severity of known ones, thereby compromising patient care and operational integrity. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on high-impact, low-likelihood risks, while seemingly efficient, can lead to the neglect of more frequent, lower-impact risks that, in aggregate, can significantly disrupt operations or negatively affect patient outcomes. This selective focus can be seen as a failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment as mandated by best practices and potentially by internal Fresenius policies designed to ensure thoroughness. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy. By rushing through the identification and analysis phases, risks missing crucial details or misinterpreting data, leading to an incomplete or flawed understanding of the risk landscape. This haste can result in inadequate control measures being implemented, potentially violating regulatory requirements for risk management, and failing to uphold the ethical duty of care. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the objectives of the risk assessment and the specific context of Fresenius's operations. This involves defining clear criteria for risk identification and evaluation, utilizing a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods where appropriate, and ensuring that the assessment is documented thoroughly. The process should involve input from relevant stakeholders across different departments to gain a holistic perspective. Finally, the findings should be communicated effectively to management, along with actionable recommendations for risk mitigation and a plan for ongoing monitoring and review. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that a candidate for a financial analyst position is reviewing publicly available financial statements for a company. While reviewing the statements, the candidate notices a significant discrepancy between the reported revenue figures in the latest annual report and projections discussed in recent, but not yet officially released, analyst calls. The candidate is aware that the company is preparing to announce its quarterly earnings soon. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the candidate in this situation? Option A. Acknowledge the discrepancy in their analysis. Clearly state the limitations due to the unverified nature of the analyst call information, and base their assessment on the officially published annual report data. Option B. Seek informal clarification from industry contacts or peers who may have insights into the company's performance. Option C. Directly contact the company's investor relations department to seek clarification on the discrepancy before the official earnings announcement. Option D. Rely on the most recently published annual report figures and disregard the information from analyst calls as preliminary and unverified. Correct answer is C. Directly contact the company's investor relations department to seek clarification on the discrepancy for the official earnings announcement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the need for timely and accurate information with the ethical obligation to maintain confidentiality and avoid conflicts of interest, particularly within the context of a regulated financial environment. The Fresenius hiring assessment test, by its nature, assesses a candidate's understanding of professional conduct and regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to established ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks. Specifically, it involves seeking clarification through appropriate channels and avoiding the premature use of potentially privileged or non-public information. This aligns with principles of integrity, objectivity, and professional competence, which are paramount in any role involving financial data or client interactions. It ensures that decisions are based on verified and publicly available information, thereby preventing any appearance of impropriety or unfair advantage. An incorrect approach that involves directly contacting the company's investor relations department for specific, non-public financial projections would be professionally unacceptable. This action could violate insider trading regulations if the information obtained is material and non-public, leading to severe legal and reputational consequences. It also bypasses the established channels for information dissemination, potentially undermining the integrity of the market. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal information from industry peers, is also professionally unsound. This method lacks the rigor and verification required for sound decision-making and can lead to misinterpretations or the propagation of rumors, which is detrimental to professional judgment and could violate standards of due diligence. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the discrepancy and proceed with the initial assessment based on outdated information, demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adapt to new information. This can lead to flawed conclusions and a misrepresentation of the company's current standing, violating professional obligations to provide accurate and up-to-date analysis. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the information source, its materiality, and its public availability. When faced with conflicting or incomplete data, the professional should first attempt to verify the information through official channels. If direct verification is not possible or appropriate, the professional should clearly state the limitations of their analysis and base their conclusions on the most reliable and publicly accessible information available, while also flagging the need for further clarification. This methodical approach ensures that decisions are defensible, ethical, and compliant with all relevant regulations. Question 4. Examination of the data shows a client requesting a modification to the standard candidate screening process for the Fresenius hiring assessment test, specifically asking to exclude a particular section of the assessment that they believe is not relevant to the role. What is the most appropriate professional course of action? Option A. Remove the requested section of the assessment but make minor, cosmetic changes to other parts of the process to appear as though a modification has been made. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, assess the potential impact of excluding the section on the validity and fairness of the assessment, and then provide advice based on the Fresenius hiring assessment test's regulatory framework and best practices. Option C. Inform the client that their request cannot be accommodated and proceed with the standard assessment process without further discussion. Option D. Immediately approve the client's request to exclude the specified section of the assessment to ensure client satisfaction and expedite the hiring process. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, assess the potential impact of excluding the section on the validity and fairness of the assessment, and then provide advice based on the Fresenius hiring assessment test's regulatory framework and best practices. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the potential for that preference to lead to suboptimal outcomes or even regulatory noncompliance. The professional must navigate the client's autonomy while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to the relevant regulatory framework. The pressure to satisfy the client's immediate request must be balanced against the long-term implications and the professional's ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing a thorough understanding of the client's objectives and the regulatory landscape before making any recommendations. This involves engaging in a detailed discussion to uncover the underlying reasons for the client's preference, assessing the feasibility and implications of their request within the Fresenius hiring assessment test's regulatory context, and then providing informed, compliant advice. This aligns with ethical principles of competence, diligence, and acting in the client's best interest, as mandated by professional standards governing hiring assessments. It ensures that any proposed course of action is both aligned with the client's goals and strictly within the bounds of the applicable regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately implementing the client's request without further inquiry. This fails to meet the professional standard of due diligence. It risks violating regulatory guidelines by potentially overlooking critical compliance requirements or best practices specific to the Fresenius hiring assessment test. Ethically, it prioritizes client satisfaction over professional responsibility and competence, potentially leading to an invalid or biased assessment process. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without understanding the rationale behind it. While the professional may suspect the request is problematic, a complete disregard for the client's input can damage the professional relationship and may miss an opportunity to educate the client on regulatory nuances. This approach lacks the collaborative and advisory aspect expected of a professional, potentially leading to client dissatisfaction and a failure to achieve the best possible outcome within the regulatory framework. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's request while making minor, superficial adjustments that do not address the core regulatory concerns. This creates a false sense of compliance. It is a form of professional negligence, as it fails to proactively identify and mitigate risks. The underlying issues that make the original request problematic from a regulatory standpoint remain unaddressed, exposing both the client and the professional to potential repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening and information gathering. This involves understanding the client's stated needs and probing for underlying motivations and objectives. Next, the professional must critically evaluate the request against the specific regulatory framework. In this case, the Fresenius hiring assessment test's guidelines. This includes identifying any potential conflicts or areas of noncompliance. Based on this analysis, the professional should then formulate advice that is both compliant and best serves the client's ultimate goals, clearly explaining the rationale and any trade-offs. Transparency and clear communication are paramount throughout this process. Question 5. Performance analysis shows that a recently implemented automated data entry system for patient treatment parameters has begun to generate a small but consistent percentage of entries that do not precisely match the physician's original handwritten orders, although the discrepancies are not immediately apparent and do not appear to have caused any adverse patient events to date. Option A. Focus the performance analysis report on the overall efficiency gains of the new system and briefly mention the minor data discrepancies as a low-priority issue requiring minimal attention. Option B. Continue to monitor the system for a few more weeks to gather more data, assuming the discrepancies are minor and unlikely to cause harm given the absence of reported adverse events. Option C. Attempt to manually correct the discrepancies in the system as they are identified without reporting them, to avoid disrupting the perceived success of the new automated process. Option D. Immediately report the observed discrepancies to the Quality Assurance Department and the relevant supervisory personnel, initiating a formal investigation into the system's accuracy and potential impact on patient care. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the observed discrepancies to the Quality Assurance Department and the relevant supervisory personnel, initiating a formal investigation into the system's accuracy and potential impact on patient care. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where a newly implemented process, intended to improve efficiency, has inadvertently created a situation that could compromise patient safety and data integrity. The pressure to demonstrate the success of the new process, coupled with potential resistance to acknowledging its flaws, creates a complex environment requiring careful judgment. The core challenge lies in balancing the desire for operational improvement with the absolute imperative of patient well-being and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the observed discrepancies to the appropriate supervisory and quality assurance personnel. This aligns with best professional practice by prioritizing patient safety and regulatory adherence above all else. Fresenius, as a healthcare provider, operates under strict regulatory frameworks, e.g., FDA regulations in the U.S. or equivalent in other jurisdictions, that mandate reporting of adverse events, deviations, and potential risks to patient care. Prompt reporting ensures that the issue can be investigated, root causes identified, and corrective actions implemented swiftly to prevent further harm. This proactive stance demonstrates ethical responsibility and commitment to quality standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to delay reporting while attempting to resolve the issue independently. This fails to acknowledge the potential for widespread impact and delays the necessary oversight and intervention from regulatory or quality assurance departments. It could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal a problem, which is a serious ethical and regulatory violation. Depending on the jurisdiction, failure to report adverse events or deviations can lead to significant penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the discrepancies as minor or insignificant without thorough investigation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the potential cumulative impact of small errors. Regulatory bodies expect healthcare professionals to maintain a high standard of vigilance and to investigate any deviation from established protocols, especially when patient care is involved. Ignoring such issues can lead to a breakdown in quality control and a failure to meet legal and ethical obligations. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the positive aspects of the new process and downplay the negative findings. This is a biased and unprofessional response that undermines the integrity of performance analysis. Best practice demands an objective and comprehensive evaluation, including the identification and reporting of any negative consequences, regardless of the initial intent of the process. Failure to provide a balanced and accurate report can mislead management and regulatory bodies, hindering effective problem solving and potentially leading to continued patient risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals in healthcare settings must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Vigilance, continuously monitoring processes and outcomes for any deviations or potential risks. 2. Objectivity, evaluating data and observations without bias, acknowledging both positive and negative findings. 3. Escalation, understanding the established channels for reporting issues and promptly escalating concerns to the appropriate authorities. 4. Collaboration, working with quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and supervisory teams to investigate and resolve problems. 5. Documentation, maintaining thorough records of observation, communications, and actions taken. This framework ensures that ethical obligations are met and that the organization operates within the bounds of applicable laws and regulations. Question 6. Governance review demonstrates that several critical internal control processes within Fresenius's patient data management system have been bypassed to expedite data entry during a period of high patient volume. While no patient data breaches have been reported, the review highlights a deviation from established protocols designed to ensure data accuracy and security. Which of the following represents the most appropriate response to this finding? Option A. Classify the bypass controls as minor operational inefficiencies that can be addressed in the next scheduled system update, prioritizing current patient throughput. Option B. Delegate the responsibility of addressing the bypass controls entirely to the IT department, trusting them to implement necessary fixes without further oversight. Option C. Immediately reinforce the importance of following established protocols to the affected teams and assume that the lack of reported breaches indicates no significant issue. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the bypass controls to understand the root cause, assess the actual risk exposure, and develop a structured remediation plan with clear accountability and timelines. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the bypass controls to understand the root cause, assess the actual risk exposure, and develop a structured remediation plan with clear accountability and timelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining robust internal controls and compliance. The pressure to deliver results quickly can lead to shortcuts that, while seemingly beneficial in the short term, can expose the organization to significant regulatory and reputational risks. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate these risks without unduly hindering necessary business activities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic review of the identified control gaps. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the integrity of internal processes and adherence to regulatory requirements. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which mandate that identified weaknesses be addressed promptly and effectively. This approach ensures that Fresenius maintains compliance with relevant healthcare regulations, e.g., those governing patient data privacy, quality of care, and financial reporting, depending on the specific context of the governance review and ethical standards, thereby safeguarding patient trust and operational sustainability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the findings as minor operational issues without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even seemingly small control gaps to escalate into significant compliance breaches or operational failures. It disregards the principle of continuous improvement and proactive risk management, which are fundamental to regulatory adherence and ethical conduct in the healthcare sector. Such an approach could lead to violations of regulations requiring adequate internal controls and reporting mechanisms. Another incorrect approach is to implement immediate, ad hoc solutions without a thorough understanding of the root cause of the control gaps. While seemingly action-oriented, this can lead to ineffective fixes that do not address the underlying systemic issues. This can result in recurring problems and a failure to achieve sustainable compliance, potentially violating regulations that require effective and documented control systems. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply a structured problem-solving methodology. Third incorrect approach is to delegate the entire remediation process to the department responsible for the identified gaps without providing adequate oversight or resources. This abdicates the responsibility of senior management and governance bodies to ensure that controls are effective and that compliance is maintained across the organization. It risks creating a perception of indifference to compliance issues and can lead to inconsistent application of corrective action, potentially violating regulatory expectations for oversight and accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the scope and potential impact of the identified control gaps. This involves engaging with the relevant departments, assessing the root causes, and evaluating the potential regulatory and operational consequences. A structured approach to remediation, involving clear action plans, assigned responsibilities, timelines, and regular progress monitoring, is essential. This framework ensures that identified issues are addressed comprehensively and effectively, upholding both operational efficiency and regulatory compliance. Question 7. Analysis of a situation where a sales team has secured a verbal commitment from a key customer for a large order, with delivery scheduled for the next quarter. The customer has indicated they will finalize the contract and payment terms upon receipt of the goods, but the sales team is eager to recognize the revenue in the current quarter to meet performance targets. What is the most appropriate accounting treatment and disclosure strategy in this scenario? Adhering strictly to U.S. GAAP and SEC guidelines. Option A. Defer revenue recognition until the contract is finalized, payment terms are agreed upon, and the goods are delivered and accepted by the customer, with appropriate disclosure of the pending order and its terms. Option B. Recognize the full revenue in the current quarter, assuming the verbal commitment is legally binding, and provide no additional disclosure as the transaction is considered complete from a sales perspective. Option C. Recognize the revenue in the current quarter, as the verbal commitment and impending delivery indicate a high probability of sale, and disclose the verbal commitment in the footnotes. Option D. Recognize a portion of the revenue based on the estimated probability of the sale being finalized, and disclose the assumptions used for this estimation. The correct answer is C. Recognize the revenue in the current quarter, as the verbal commitment and impending delivery indicate a high probability of sale, and disclose the verbal commitment in the footnotes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to present a positive financial outlook and the ethical obligation to provide accurate and transparent information to stakeholders. The Fresenius hiring assessment test, in its regulatory context, emphasizes adherence to accounting principles and disclosure requirements. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical responsibilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, and relevant regulatory guidelines, such as those mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. If Fresenius is a publicly traded entity in the U.S., this involves recognizing revenue only when earned and realizable, and ensuring all disclosures are complete and not misleading. This aligns with the ethical duty of integrity and objectivity, preventing the misrepresentation of financial performance. An incorrect approach that involves prematurely recognizing revenue, even with a verbal commitment from a customer, fails to comply with the revenue recognition principle under GAAP. This principle requires that revenue be earned and realized or realizable before it can be recognized. Such an action could be considered fraudulent or misleading, violating SEC regulations concerning financial reporting and potentially leading to penalties. Another incorrect approach, which is to omit disclosure of the contingent nature of the revenue, violates the full disclosure principle. This principle mandates that all material information that could influence an investor's decision must be disclosed. Failing to disclose the uncertainty surrounding the customer's final acceptance and payment would be a significant omission, breaching ethical standards and regulatory requirements for transparency. A third incorrect approach, which is to aggressively interpret contract terms to justify immediate revenue recognition, demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and objectivity. While contract interpretation is part of accounting, it must be done in good faith and in accordance with established accounting standards, not to manipulate financial results. This approach risks violating the spirit, if not the letter, of accounting regulations and ethical codes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of applicable accounting standards, e.g., ASC 606 for revenue recognition in the U.S., relevant regulatory pronouncements, and the company's internal policies. Professionals should consult with senior management, legal counsel, and potentially external auditors when faced with complex accounting judgments. They must maintain professional skepticism, challenge assumptions, and prioritize accurate and transparent financial reporting over short-term gains. The ultimate goal is to uphold the integrity of financial information and protect the interests of investors and other stakeholders. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, less expensive medication dispensing system could save the hospital $500,000 annually. However, the risk assessment indicates a potential for a 0.5% increase in medication errors, which could lead to increased patient morbidity and mortality. Given these findings, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Reject the new system outright, as any increase in medication errors, regardless of statistical probability, is unacceptable and violates the hospital's commitment to patient safety. Option B. Implement the new system only after a thorough review of the risk assessment by an independent patient safety committee, with a clear plan for enhanced monitoring and mitigation strategies for identified risks, and a commitment to reevaluate the system's safety and efficacy within a defined period. Option C. Implement the new system and rely on existing quality control measures to manage any potential increase in medication errors, assuming that the cost savings will allow for investment in other patient care initiatives. Option D. Proceed with the implementation of the new system immediately, as the projected cost savings are substantial and the potential for increased errors is statistically low. Correct answer is B. Implement the new system only after a thorough review of the risk assessment by an independent patient safety committee, with a clear plan for enhanced monitoring and mitigation strategies for identified risks, and a commitment to reevaluate the system's safety and efficacy within a defined period. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential financial benefits against significant patient safety risks, a core tenet of healthcare ethics and regulation. The decision-maker must critically evaluate whether the projected cost savings justify the increased likelihood of adverse events, even if those events are statistically rare. This requires a nuanced understanding of risk tolerance, regulatory expectation, and the ethical imperative to prioritize patient well-being. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that goes beyond a simple cost-benefit calculation. It acknowledges that while cost-effectiveness is important, it cannot supersede patient safety. This approach aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate robust risk management processes, emphasizing proactive identification, evaluation, and mitigation of potential harms. It reflects an ethical commitment to the principle of non-maleficence, do no harm, and beneficence, act in the patient's best interest. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost savings, ignoring the potential for increased patient harm, fails to meet regulatory requirements for risk management. Such an approach would likely violate ethical principles by implicitly accepting a higher level of patient risk for financial gain. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the identified risks as statistically insignificant, without a thorough evaluation of their potential severity or impact on vulnerable patient populations, demonstrates a failure in due diligence and a disregard for the precautionary principle often embedded in healthcare regulations. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals, rather than systematic data and expert consensus, lacks the rigor required for sound risk assessment and decision-making, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance and ethical breaches. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem and its potential impacts. This involves gathering comprehensive data, consulting with relevant stakeholders, including clinical staff and risk management experts, and systematically evaluating risks and benefits. The process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments as new information emerges. When faced with uncertainty, the decision maker should err on the side of caution, prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance. Question 9. System analysis indicates that a new electronic health record (EHR) system is being implemented across Fresenius facilities. A critical phase involves migrating existing patient data from legacy systems. What is the most professionally responsible approach to ensure patient safety and regulatory compliance during this data migration and subsequent system rollout? Option A. Prioritize the migration of core patient demographic data first, deferring the validation of more complex clinical data until after the system is live to expedite the process. Option B. Proceed with the migration and full system rollout as quickly as possible, relying on the vendor's pre-migration testing and assuming minimal data discrepancies. Option C. Implement the new EHR system immediately across all facilities, providing only basic user guides and expecting staff to adapt through on-the-job learning. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-stage validation of data integrity and system functionality post-migration, alongside phased staff training and a pilot rollout in a controlled environment before full deployment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive, multi-stage validation of data integrity and system functionality post-migration, alongside phased staff training and a pilot rollout in a controlled environment before full deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in healthcare settings where new technology is introduced. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency and data integration with the paramount importance of patient safety and regulatory compliance. The pressure to quickly adopt a new system, coupled with potential resistance to change from staff, can create an environment where shortcuts or incomplete validation processes might be considered. This necessitates careful judgment to ensure that all critical aspects, particularly those related to patient data integrity and regulatory adherence, are thoroughly addressed before full deployment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation with rigorous testing and validation at each stage, specifically focusing on data migration accuracy and system security. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice and data protection regulations, which mandate that systems handling patient health information must be secure, accurate, and reliable. A thorough validation process ensures that patient data is not compromised during the transition, that the system functions as intended, and that it meets all relevant regulatory requirements for data handling and patient care. This methodical approach minimizes risks to patient safety and maintains compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing rapid deployment over comprehensive data validation. This fails to uphold the regulatory requirement for accurate patient records, which is fundamental to patient safety and continuity of care. It also risks data breaches or corruption, violating data protection laws. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on vendor assurances without independent verification of system functionality and security. This neglects the professional responsibility to ensure that any system used in patient care meets established standards and regulatory mandates. It can lead to unforeseen issues that compromise patient safety or violate privacy regulations. A third incorrect approach is to bypass thorough staff training on the new system, assuming existing knowledge will suffice. This not only hinders effective system utilization, but also increases the risk of errors in data entry or retrieval, potentially impacting patient care and violating regulatory guidelines that emphasize competent use of medical devices and information systems. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such implementation challenges should adopt a risk-based approach. This involves identifying potential risks to patient safety, data integrity, and regulatory compliance at each stage of the implementation. A structured project management methodology, including clear milestones for testing, validation, and training, should be employed. Open communication with all stakeholders, including clinical staff, IT, and compliance officers, is crucial to address concerns and ensure buy-in. Prioritizing patient safety and regulatory adherence above all else, even under pressure for expediency, is the cornerstone of ethical and professional practice in healthcare technology implementation. Question 10. Research into a novel treatment protocol for a specific patient condition has revealed a potentially more effective approach than the current standard of care utilized at Fresenius. The patient's condition is deteriorating, and the current treatment is not yielding satisfactory results. The practitioner is aware of this new protocol, but has not yet received formal training or approval for its use within Fresenius. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the novel treatment protocol based on the practitioner's personal assessment of its potential benefits without seeking formal approval or consultation. Option B. Immediately implement the novel treatment protocol on the patient, given the urgency of their condition and the potential for improved outcomes. Option C. Inform the patient that the novel treatment is not currently approved and therefore cannot be considered, and continue with the existing treatment plan. Option D. Initiate a formal review process for the novel treatment protocol, involving relevant Fresenius departments and seeking expert consultation, while continuing to manage the patient with the current standard of care and exploring all available supportive measures. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal review process for the novel treatment protocol, involving relevant Fresenius departments and seeking expert consultation, while continuing to manage the patient with the current standard of care and exploring all available supportive measures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate need to address a critical patient care issue and the established regulatory framework governing the administration of new treatments. The pressure to act quickly to improve patient outcomes must be balanced against the requirement for thorough due diligence and adherence to Fresenius's internal policies and relevant healthcare regulations. Careful judgment is required to navigate this tension without compromising patient safety or regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient well-being through a structured, evidence-based, and compliant process. It acknowledges the urgency while ensuring that any new treatment is evaluated for safety, efficacy, and appropriateness within the Fresenius operational and regulatory context. This involves consulting with relevant internal stakeholders, reviewing existing protocols, and potentially seeking expert opinion, all of which are foundational to responsible healthcare delivery and align with the principles of good clinical governance and patient safety standards. An incorrect approach that involves immediately implementing the new treatment without proper vetting would fail to adhere to Fresenius's internal quality assurance protocols and potentially violate broader healthcare regulations that mandate the use of approved and validated treatments. This could lead to unforeseen adverse events, lack of proper documentation, and a failure to meet standards of care, exposing both the individual practitioner and the organization to significant risk. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the new treatment outright due to a lack of immediate familiarity, fails to embrace potential advancements in patient care, and could be seen as a failure to act in the best interest of the patient if the treatment is indeed beneficial and safe. This demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement with evolving medical knowledge and a potential disregard for patient-centered care principles. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the patient's expressed desire without considering the clinical appropriateness or regulatory implications, would be a failure of professional responsibility. While patient autonomy is important, it must be exercised within the bounds of safe and effective medical practice, as dictated by professional standards and regulatory requirements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation. First, assessing the clinical urgency and potential benefit of the proposed intervention. Second, consulting relevant internal policies, guidelines, and regulatory requirements. Third, engaging with appropriate colleagues, supervisors, or subject matter experts for consultation and validation. And finally, documenting the decision-making process and the rationale for the chosen course of action. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and prioritize both patient safety and organizational integrity. Question 11. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation in the packaging of a critical medication, specifically a slight misalignment of the label on 0.5% of the units produced in the latest batch. The deviation does not affect the integrity of the seal or the legibility of essential information, but it is outside the established specification. Option A. Conduct a rapid visual inspection of the entire batch to identify and manually correct the misaligned labels before releasing the product. Option B. Release the affected batch to meet urgent market demand, documenting the deviation and planning to address the packaging issue in future production runs. Option C. Immediately halt further production and distribution of the affected batch. Initiate a thorough root cause analysis to identify the source of the misalignment, and implement corrective and preventive actions before releasing any product. Option D. Proceed with releasing the batch, but instruct the sales team to verbally inform healthcare providers about the packaging anomaly. The correct answer is C. Immediately halt further production and distribution of the affected batch. Initiate a thorough root cause analysis to identify the source of the misalignment, and implement corrective and preventive actions before releasing any product. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for product availability with the imperative to maintain stringent quality standards, especially within a regulated industry like pharmaceuticals. The pressure to meet market demand can create a temptation to overlook minor deviations, but doing so carries significant risks. Careful judgment is required to assess the true impact of any deviation on patient safety and product efficacy, and to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. By initiating a thorough investigation and halting production until the root cause is identified and rectified, the company demonstrates a commitment to good manufacturing practices, GMP, and the ethical responsibility to provide safe and effective products. This proactive stance prevents potentially harmful products from reaching patients and avoids severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities. An incorrect approach that involves releasing the product with a minor deviation without full investigation fails to uphold the fundamental principles of GMP. This could lead to adverse patient outcomes, product recalls, and significant fines from regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to conceal the deviation or downplay its significance, constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory breach, potentially leading to criminal charges and loss of license. A third incorrect approach, which involves a superficial investigation that doesn't identify the root cause, is also unacceptable as it leaves the system vulnerable to recurring issues, thereby compromising ongoing product quality and patient safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, e.g., FDA regulations for pharmaceuticals. This framework should include a robust quality management system that mandates the reporting and investigation of all deviations. When a deviation is identified, the process should involve immediate risk assessment, root cause analysis, implementation of corrective and preventive actions, COPPA, and thorough documentation. The decision to release or hold products should be based on objective data and a comprehensive evaluation of potential risks to patients and product integrity. Question 12. Process analysis reveals that a healthcare organization intends to share anonymized patient data with a research institution for a study on disease prevalence. The organization has removed patient names, addresses, and social security numbers from the dataset. What is the most appropriate next step to ensure compliance with data privacy regulations? Option A. Aggregate the data into broad categories, such as age ranges and general geographic regions, without a detailed analysis of residual identifiability. Option B. Share the data with the research institution with a disclaimer that the data is anonymized, placing the responsibility for re-identification solely on the recipient. Option C. Conduct a thorough assessment to determine if the remaining data elements, individually or in combination with other reasonably available information, could still identify an individual, and apply further de-identification techniques if necessary. Option D. Assume that the removal of direct identifiers is sufficient and proceed with sharing the data immediately to expedite the research. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough assessment to determine if the remaining data elements, individually or in combination with other reasonably available information, could still identify an individual, and apply further de-identification techniques if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data management with the stringent requirements of patient privacy and data security, as mandated by healthcare regulations. The core difficulty lies in determining the appropriate level of anonymization or de-identification for patient data when it is to be used for research purposes, ensuring that the data is no longer identifiable while still retaining its utility for analysis. This requires a nuanced understanding of what constitutes identifiable information under the relevant legal framework and the potential risks associated with re-identification. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the data to determine if it has been de-identified in accordance with the specific standards set by the applicable regulatory framework. This typically means removing or altering direct identifiers, like names, addresses, social security numbers, and indirect identifiers, like dates of birth, unique demographic combinations, to a degree that makes it highly unlikely that an individual can be re-identified, even by combining the data with other available information. This aligns with the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that patient data is handled responsibly and ethically for its intended research use, thereby upholding patient trust and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that simply removing obvious direct identifiers is sufficient. This fails to account for indirect identifiers and the potential for re-identification through linkage with external datasets, which is a violation of privacy regulations designed to protect individuals. Another incorrect approach is to over-anonymize the data to the point where it loses its research value. While privacy is paramount, regulations also aim to facilitate legitimate research. Rendering the data unusable for its intended purpose without a compelling reason would be an inefficient and potentially counterproductive use of resources, and could indirectly hinder beneficial research. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on a generic, one-size-fits-all de-identification method without considering the specific characteristics of the dataset and the potential for re-identification within the context of the intended research. This lack of tailored assessment increases the risk of privacy breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach. This involves understanding the specific regulatory requirements for de-identification, conducting a comprehensive assessment of the data's identifiability, and implementing de-identification techniques that are appropriate for the data and the intended use. If there is any doubt about whether the data is sufficiently de-identified, it is prudent to err on the side of caution and seek expert advice or implement more robust de-identification measures. Continuous monitoring and review of de-identification practices are also essential to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory interpretations. Question 13. Which approach would be most effective for optimizing the patient intake process at Fresenius Dialysis Center, considering the need for both efficiency gains and unwavering adherence to patient safety protocols? Option A. Introducing a new, more complex patient screening questionnaire to gather additional health data, with the expectation that this will indirectly improve future treatment planning, despite an initial increase in check-in duration and potential for staff training gaps. Option B, prioritizing the reduction of staffing hours during peak check-in times to lower operational costs, assuming that patient flow will naturally adjust without a detailed analysis of potential bottlenecks or impact on patient experience. Option C, implementing a new digital check-in system that significantly reduces administrative time, after a pilot study demonstrating a 20% decrease in average patient wait times, with no reported increase in data entry errors or patient dissatisfaction during the pilot. Option D, streamlining the existing paperwork-based check-in by reducing the number of required fields on forms, based on staff feedback that current forms are too lengthy, without formal validation of the impact on data accuracy or patient privacy. The correct answer is C, implementing a new digital check-in system that significantly reduces administrative time, after a pilot study demonstrating a 20% decrease in average patient wait times, with no reported increase in data entry errors or patient dissatisfaction during the pilot. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization within a regulated healthcare environment like Fresenius. The core difficulty lies in balancing the imperative to improve efficiency and patient care with the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance and patient safety. Any proposed optimization must demonstrably maintain or enhance the quality of care and adhere strictly to established protocols and guidelines, without introducing new risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven, and compliant methodology. It involves a thorough understanding of the existing process, identification of bottlenecks through objective measurement, and the development of solutions that are validated against both efficiency goals and regulatory standards. This ensures that improvements are sustainable, safe, and align with the overarching mission of providing high-quality patient care within the Fresenius framework. Ethical considerations, such as patient well-being and data integrity, are implicitly addressed by this rigorous, evidence-based method. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive impact assessment on patient care or regulatory adherence would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to compromised treatment quality, increased risk of adverse events, and potential violations of Fresenius's internal policies and external regulatory mandates. Similarly, implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or without proper validation risks introducing unforeseen problems, undermining trust, and failing to achieve genuine, sustainable improvements. Such actions would disregard the professional obligation to ensure patient safety and maintain operational integrity. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured problem-solving framework. This includes clearly defining the problem, gathering relevant data, both operational and patient outcome related, identifying root causes, brainstorming potential solutions, evaluating these solutions against multiple criteria: efficiency, safety, cost, regulatory compliance, selecting the most viable option, implementing it with careful monitoring, and finally, evaluating the results and making further adjustments as needed. This iterative, evidence-based approach ensures that all decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with professional responsibilities. Question 14. The review process indicates that a nurse is preparing to administer a prescribed medication to a patient. Upon reviewing the patient's chart, the nurse notices a discrepancy between the prescribed dosage and the patient's known allergies, which are documented in the chart. The physician who prescribed the medication is currently unavailable. Which of the following actions should the nurse take? Option A. Administer the medication as prescribed but closely monitor the patient for any adverse reactions. Option B. Administer a reduced dosage of the medication, believing it to be a safer alternative. Option C. Withhold the medication and document the discrepancy, attempting to contact the prescribing physician or a covering physician for clarification before proceeding. Option D. Administer the medication as prescribed, assuming the physician has considered all factors. Correct answer is D. Administer the medication as prescribed, assuming the physician has considered all factors. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a patient with the established protocols and ethical considerations surrounding the administration of medication. The healthcare professional must exercise sound judgment to ensure patient safety and adherence to regulatory guidelines. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient well-being and adheres to the principle of do no harm. By seeking clarification from the prescribing physician, the professional ensures that the medication is administered as intended and that any potential contraindications or necessary adjustments are addressed. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate accurate medication administration and physician oversight. It also upholds the ethical duty of care, which requires healthcare professionals to act in the best interest of their patients. An incorrect approach that involves administering the medication without clarification would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It could lead to adverse patient outcomes, such as an allergic reaction, drug interaction, or ineffective treatment, violating the fundamental principle of patient safety. This would also contravene regulations requiring adherence to physician orders and proper medication reconciliation. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying administration indefinitely without attempting to contact the physician, would also be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a delay in necessary treatment, potentially harming the patient and violating the duty to provide timely care. It also fails to follow established protocols for resolving medication discrepancies. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the discrepancy or concern. This should be followed by a systematic attempt to resolve the issue through established channels, such as contacting the prescriber or consulting pharmacy resources. If clarification cannot be obtained promptly and the patient's condition warrants immediate intervention, the professional should escalate the issue to a supervisor or a designated medical authority, always documenting all actions taken and communications. Question 15. The analysis reveals that a long-term Fresenius patient experiencing significant financial hardship expresses a strong desire to continue a specific, high-cost treatment that their current insurance no longer fully covers. The patient believes this treatment is essential for their quality of life and is requesting Fresenius to absorb a substantial portion of the out-of-pocket expenses. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the Fresenius care team? Option A. Inform the patient that Fresenius cannot subsidize treatment costs beyond what insurance covers and suggest they seek alternative, less expensive treatment options elsewhere. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the patient's medical necessity for the requested treatment. Explore all available financial assistance programs, internal and external, and engage in transparent communication with the patient about treatment options, costs, and potential alternatives. Option C. Immediately approve the request to cover the majority of the out-of-pocket expenses to maintain patient satisfaction and loyalty, as this aligns with Fresenius's commitment to patient care. Option D. Prioritize the financial sustainability of Fresenius by limiting coverage for non-essential treatments and advising the patient to explore more affordable care providers. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the patient's medical necessity for the requested treatment. Explore all available financial assistance programs, internal and external, and engage in transparent communication with the patient about treatment options, costs, and potential alternatives. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial needs of a patient with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations of a healthcare provider. The Fresenius hiring assessment test likely evaluates an understanding of patient care principles within a regulated environment. The core conflict lies in a patient's expressed desire for a treatment that may not be medically indicated or financially sustainable in the long run, versus the provider's duty of care and adherence to Fresenius's operational guidelines and relevant healthcare regulations. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation ethically and professionally, ensuring patient well-being while maintaining operational integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, patient-centered assessment and transparent communication. This involves thoroughly evaluating the patient's medical condition, exploring all available treatment options within Fresenius's scope of services and regulatory compliance, and discussing the financial implications openly and honestly. This aligns with ethical principles of beneficence, acting in the patient's best interest, non-maleficence, avoiding harm, and autonomy, respecting the patient's right to make informed decisions. It also adheres to regulatory frameworks that mandate informed consent and fair treatment, ensuring that decisions are based on medical necessity and available resources, not solely on immediate patient demands or potential financial gain. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on accommodating the patient's immediate request without a thorough medical and financial assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to inappropriate treatment, potentially causing harm or incurring unnecessary costs, violating the principle of non-maleficence and potentially breaching regulatory requirements for medically necessary care. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately dismissing the patient's request without exploration, would fail to uphold the principle of beneficence and could be seen as a lack of empathy and a failure to explore all viable options, potentially violating patient rights to receive appropriate care and information. A third incorrect approach that involves pressuring the patient into a treatment plan that is not fully understood or medically justified, solely to meet a perceived service target, would be a severe ethical and regulatory breach, undermining patient autonomy and trust. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, gather all relevant information, medical history, current condition, patient stated needs and concerns. Second, consult with relevant medical professionals and review Fresenius's established protocols and guidelines. Third, assess the medical appropriateness and financial feasibility of proposed treatments, considering regulatory constraints. Fourth, engage in open and honest communication with the patient, explaining all options, risks, benefits, and costs. Fifth, document all discussions and decisions thoroughly. This process ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and compliant with all applicable regulations and organizational policies. Question 16. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive approach to evaluating potential solutions for operational challenges. If a new technology is proposed that promises significant efficiency gains but requires substantial upfront investment and a departure from established patient care protocols, what is the most prudent decision-making framework to adopt? Option A. Implement the technology on a trial basis in a single department without a comprehensive review, relying on the anecdotal feedback of a few key personnel to gauge its effectiveness and compliance. Option B. Prioritize the immediate efficiency gains and cost savings, assuming that any deviations from current protocols can be managed through on-the-job training and that regulatory bodies will be accommodating. Option C. Conduct a thorough cost-benefit analysis. Assess the technology's impact on patient outcomes and safety, evaluate its long-term strategic alignment, and ensure compliance with all relevant Fresenius policies and external regulations before implementation. Option D. Focus solely on the upfront investment cost and the potential for immediate return on investment, deferring any detailed assessment of long-term strategic fit or regulatory implications until after the technology is fully deployed. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough cost-benefit analysis, assess the technology's impact on patient outcomes and safety, evaluate its long-term strategic alignment, and ensure compliance with all relevant Fresenius policies and external regulations before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term strategic goals, all while adhering to regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. The pressure to meet short-term targets can often lead to decisions that compromise future sustainability or violate established guidelines. Careful judgment is essential to navigate these competing demands effectively. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven evaluation of all viable options. This involves considering not only the immediate impact, but also the long-term consequences, potential risks, and alignment with Fresenius's overall strategic objectives and ethical framework. Adherence to regulatory requirements, such as those governing patient care, data privacy, and financial reporting, is paramount. This approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and contribute to the organization's sustained success and reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the quickest or cheapest solution without thorough analysis fails to consider potential downstream negative impacts, such as increased long-term costs, reputational damage, or regulatory noncompliance. This could lead to violations of Fresenius's internal policies or external regulations designed to protect patients and ensure fair business practices. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal bias rather than objective data overlooks critical factors and can result in suboptimal or even harmful outcomes. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold professional standards of evidence-based decision-making. A third incorrect approach that ignores potential ethical implications, such as conflicts of interest or fairness to stakeholders, can lead to significant reputational damage and erosion of trust, potentially violating ethical codes of conduct. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that includes clearly defining the problem and objectives, gathering relevant data and information, identifying and evaluating all potential solutions, considering their pros, cons, risks, and alignment with strategic goals and ethical principles, consulting with relevant stakeholders, making a reasoned decision, implementing the chosen solution, and monitoring its effectiveness and making adjustments as needed. This systematic process ensures that decisions are robust, ethical, and strategically sound. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that during the Fresenius hiring assessment test, a candidate discovers that one of the individuals involved in the assessment process is a close personal friend. The candidate is aware that this friend has the authority to significantly influence the assessment outcome. What is the most appropriate course of action for the candidate to ensure the integrity of the assessment process and uphold professional standards? Option A. Proceed with the assessment as planned, assuming their friend will remain objective and not let the personal relationship influence their judgment. Option B. Attempt to subtly communicate with their friend before or during the assessment to ensure a favorable outcome without explicitly mentioning the relationship. Option C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the assessment administrator and request to be recused from any part of the assessment that involves their friend's evaluation. Option D. Withdraw from the entire hiring process without providing any specific reason, to avoid any potential complications. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the assessment administrator and request to be recused from any part of the assessment that involves their friend's evaluation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate a situation where a personal relationship might influence objective decision-making, potentially compromising ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining impartiality and ensuring that decisions are based on merit and established procedures, not on personal connections. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate potential conflicts of interest. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and adherence to established conflict of interest policies. By disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from the decision-making process, the individual upholds the principles of fairness, integrity, and accountability. This aligns with the ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks that mandate unbiased decision-making in professional settings, ensuring that all candidates are evaluated on equal footing and that the integrity of the hiring process is preserved. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the evaluation without disclosure and recusal would represent a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to perceptions of favoritism, undermining the credibility of the hiring process and potentially violating Fresenius's internal policies on conflicts of interest and equal opportunity. Such an action could also expose the company to legal challenges and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to subtly influence the outcome in favor of the acquaintance without explicit disclosure, is equally problematic. This constitutes a breach of trust and professional conduct, as it involves deception and manipulation. It directly contravenes the ethical obligation to act with integrity and impartiality. A further incorrect approach, such as withdrawing from the hiring process entirely without any explanation or disclosure, might seem like an avoidance tactic, but fails to address the underlying issue of potential conflict, does not demonstrate proactive ethical behavior or adherence to established procedures for managing conflicts of interest. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear decision-making framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Recognize when a personal relationship could influence professional judgment. 2. Consult relevant policies. Review company policies on conflicts of interest, ethics, and hiring procedures. 3. Disclose the conflict. Transparently inform relevant parties, G. HR hiring manager about the relationship. 4. Recuse oneself. Step away from any decision-making or evaluation processes directly related to the individual involved. 5. Seek guidance. If unsure, consult with a supervisor, HR, or the ethics department for clarification and direction. 6. Document the process. Keep a record of the disclosure and the steps taken to manage the conflict. Question 18. During the evaluation of a patient's medication administration, a nurse notices a significant discrepancy between the prescribed dosage on the physician's order and the standard dosage for the medication as listed in the drug reference guide. The patient is awaiting the medication. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the nurse? Option A. Contact the hospital pharmacist to inquire about the correct dosage for the medication. Option B. Administer the medication as prescribed, but monitor the patient closely for any adverse reactions. Option C. Administer the medication as prescribed by the physician to avoid delaying patient care. Option D. Contact the prescribing physician directly to clarify the dosage and confirm the order. Correct answer is C. Administer the medication as prescribed by the physician to avoid delaying patient care. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a patient with the established protocols and ethical considerations surrounding medication administration. The nurse must exercise sound judgment to determine the most appropriate course of action when faced with a discrepancy that could impact patient safety. The pressure to act quickly in a healthcare setting, coupled with the potential for serious consequences, necessitates a structured and informed decision-making process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves verifying the medication order with the prescribing physician before administration, represents best professional practice. This aligns with fundamental principles of patient safety and medication management. Healthcare regulations and professional nursing standards mandate that nurses ensure the accuracy and appropriateness of all prescribed medications before administering them. This verification process mitigates the risk of medication errors, such as administering the wrong drug, dose, or route, which could lead to adverse patient outcomes. It upholds the ethical duty of beneficence, acting in the patient's best interest, and non-maleficence, avoiding harm. Incorrect approach is analysis. Administering the medication as prescribed without further inquiry, despite the discrepancy, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach disregards the established protocols for medication reconciliation and verification, directly violating patient safety standards. It could lead to a serious medication error, resulting in patient harm, and would be a breach of professional accountability. Contacting the pharmacy to clarify the order before administering the medication, while a step towards verification, is not the most direct or appropriate first action when a discrepancy is noted in the physician's order itself. The physician is the ultimate authority on the prescription, and direct communication with them is essential to resolve ambiguities or potential errors in their order. Relying solely on the pharmacy might delay critical clarification and still leave the nurse with an unconfirmed order from the prescriber. Seeking advice from a more experienced colleague without directly verifying the order with the physician is also an insufficient approach. While collegial consultation can be valuable, it should not replace the primary responsibility of the administering nurse to ensure the accuracy of the medication order. The experienced colleague may offer guidance, but the ultimate responsibility for patient safety rests with the nurse administering the medication, who must confirm the order with the prescriber. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a systematic decision-making framework. This typically involves 1. Recognizing the discrepancy and its potential implications. 2. Consulting reliable resources, e.g., drug references, facility protocols, for initial guidance. 3. Prioritizing direct communication with the prescriber to clarify any ambiguities or errors in the order. 4. Documenting all actions taken and communications. 5. Administering the medication only after the order has been confirmed and deemed safe and appropriate. This structured approach ensures patient safety, adherence to regulations, and ethical practice. Question 19. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for increased medication errors due to a newly implemented electronic health record system. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the medication administration protocols within the new EHR system, identify specific points of potential error, and develop targeted training modules for all clinical staff on these identified vulnerabilities and best practices for error prevention. Option B. Document the identified risk in the risk register and await further instructions from senior management before taking any action. Option C. Rely on the existing general training provided for the EHR system, assuming staff will adapt to any medication error risks over time. Option D. Immediately revert to the previous paper-based charting system to eliminate the risk of medication errors associated with the new EHR. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of the medication administration protocols within the new EHR system, identify specific points of potential error, and develop targeted training modules for all clinical staff on these identified vulnerabilities and best practices for error prevention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of how to interpret and apply risk assessment findings to a specific operational context within Fresenius. The challenge lies in moving beyond a generic understanding of risk to a practical, actionable response that aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities. The need for a deep analysis implies that a superficial or reactive approach is insufficient. Professionals must demonstrate the ability to critically evaluate the implications of identified risks and select the most appropriate mitigation strategy, considering both immediate impact and long-term sustainability. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified risk with a proactive and integrated strategy. It acknowledges that the risk assessment is not an isolated event, but a catalyst for informed decision-making. By proposing a comprehensive review of existing protocols and the development of targeted training, this approach demonstrates a commitment to systemic improvement and employee competency. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that emphasize the importance of robust internal controls, continuous improvement, and ensuring that personnel are adequately trained to manage operational risks. Ethically, it prioritizes patient safety and the integrity of Fresenius's operations by addressing potential vulnerabilities before they manifest as incidents. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach might involve solely relying on the risk assessment report without further investigation or action. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for proactive risk management and demonstrates a lack of professional diligence. It suggests a passive acceptance of identified risks, which is unacceptable when patient care and operational integrity are at stake. Ethically, this approach could be seen as negligent, as it ignores potential harms that could have been prevented. Another incorrect approach could be to implement a superficial change, such as a minor procedural tweak, without a thorough understanding of the root cause or the potential effectiveness of the proposed solution. This approach is problematic because it may not adequately mitigate the identified risk, leading to its recurrence. It also suggests a lack of commitment to genuine problem-solving and may be seen as a compliance theater exercise rather than a genuine effort to improve safety and efficiency. This could violate ethical principles of competence and due care. A third incorrect approach might be to dismiss the risk assessment findings as irrelevant or exaggerated without proper justification. This demonstrates a failure to engage with the risk management process and a potential disregard for established procedures. It could stem from a lack of understanding of the assessment's methodology or a resistance to change. This approach carries significant regulatory risk, as it implies a failure to adhere to mandated risk assessment protocols and could lead to serious compliance issues. Ethically, it undermines the trust placed in professionals to act responsibly and to prioritize the well-being of patients and the organization. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must thoroughly understand the findings of the risk assessment, including its scope, methodology, and the specific risks identified. Second, they should evaluate the potential impact and likelihood of each identified risk in the context of Fresenius's operations. Third, they must consider various mitigation strategies, assessing their feasibility, effectiveness, and alignment with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The decision should be based on a comprehensive analysis of these factors, prioritizing approaches that offer the most robust and sustainable risk reduction. This involves consulting relevant internal policies, regulatory guidance, and potentially seeking expert advice. Finally, the chosen approach should be documented, implemented, and monitored for effectiveness, fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a significant impact related to a potential deviation in a critical patient care process. What is the most appropriate next step to assess and manage this risk? Option A. Initiate a detailed root cause analysis to fully understand the factors contributing to the potential deviation and explore targeted mitigation strategies. Option B. Immediately implement a costly, system-wide overhaul of the affected process to eliminate any possibility of deviation. Option C. Defer further action until the risk matrix indicates a high likelihood or impact, as current assessment does not warrant immediate extensive resources. Option D. Focus on immediate cost-saving measures within the department, assuming the risk is manageable without significant intervention. The correct answer is A. Initiate a detailed root cause analysis to fully understand the factors contributing to the potential deviation and explore targeted mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of potential regulatory noncompliance and patient safety. The risk matrix, a standard tool for impact assessment, highlights a moderate likelihood of a significant impact. This means that while the event might not occur frequently, its consequences could be severe. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of response when a risk is not definitively high, but carries substantial potential harm. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and documented investigation before committing resources to a specific mitigation strategy. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, which emphasize evidence-based decision-making. Specifically, it adheres to the Fresenius hiring assessment test's implied regulatory framework, which would likely mandate a systematic approach to risk assessment and management, ensuring that actions taken are proportionate to the identified risks and are supported by data. This approach allows for a more nuanced understanding of the root cause, enabling the selection of the most effective and efficient mitigation strategy, thereby safeguarding patient well-being and maintaining regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without a comprehensive impact assessment fails to acknowledge the potential for significant patient harm or regulatory penalties. This could lead to a superficial fix that does not address the underlying issue, resulting in recurring problems and increased long-term costs. Ethically, it prioritizes financial expediency over patient safety, which is unacceptable in a healthcare setting. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing a costly, broad-stroke solution without a detailed investigation is also professionally unsound. While it might appear proactive, it risks over-allocating resources to address a problem that may not warrant such an extensive response, or worse, implementing a solution that is not tailored to the actual root cause. This demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and potentially wasteful expenditure, which is contrary to responsible operational management and regulatory expectations for efficient resource utilization. Finally, an approach that delays action due to the risk matrix not indicating a high rating is a critical failure. Regulatory frameworks and ethical guidelines in healthcare emphasize a proactive stance on potential risks, especially when the impact is significant. Waiting for a risk to escalate too high before acting is a dereliction of duty and can lead to severe consequences, including patient harm and regulatory sanctions. Professional decision-making in such situations should involve a framework that includes 1. Understanding the context and potential consequences. 2. Gathering sufficient data to accurately assess the risk. 3. Evaluating various mitigation options based on effectiveness, cost, and feasibility. And 4. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale for the chosen course of action.